ahead and begin the program for this evening. But before we get started, there are some special guests I'd like to introduce. First, from Palm Beach Gardens Fire Rescue, Chief Michael Southard. Chief Southard. The Chief has brought some of his executive staff. I thank you all for coming. And Chief Stephen Stepp from Palm Beach Gardens Police Department. You know, I really can't say enough about the partnership and how easy that the chiefs and his executive staff make it for us to operate in our emergency operations and in partnership with them. And it's just, they've made it as easy as possible for us, and we greatly appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And with no further ado, I was able to, and lucky enough, to invite the director from the Florida Department of Emergency Management, and he kindly accepted our invitation to speak this evening, Director Brian Kuhn. So with that, I'd like a warm welcome for Director Kuhn.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Kuhn. I am seeking the Republican nomination for president this year. I'm not. All right, I'm just kidding. It seemed like the thing to do today. It seemed there was a lot of people. You already got a Palm Beach guy did that today, though, so I won't weasel in on that one. Maybe 4 years from now. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. I love doing events like this. I will never take an invitation to speak at a lunch, but I will always take an invitation to speak at a dinner, especially if they're serving alcohol, because the more that you all imbibe, the better I sound. So keep eating and drinking. I really appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here. You know, I spend most of my time in April and May traveling around the state, talking to folks about hurricane season, helping them understand what the upcoming season could look like and what it is that they can do individually, as communities, as business, as charitable organizations to get ready for it. And that's a big part of what I do is again, get out there and help people understand that Florida, a fantastic place to live, great place to work. We all enjoy being Floridians, but there is that chance that this will be the year that we have a hurricane hit us, and we want to make sure that we've done everything we can ahead of time to get ready for it. And so again, I spend most of my time, April and May, doing those kinds of events. Also, in this month, in the state of Florida, we will have the state Hurricane Conference. It's called the Governor's Hurricane Conference, and for a week in May, all of the folks who do emergency management, who deal in preparation and response and recovery, get together. And this year it's in Orlando to learn, to do lessons learned, to do training, to share best practices with each other. That will happen this month. Also in May, we will do the statewide hurricane exercise, which is the state's opportunity to work with all of the local, both at the city and the county level, to walk through a hurricane scenario to make sure that the new folks understand what their roles are, to give the old folks who've been in the business for a while an opportunity to refresh their skills. And so we'll be focusing on that exercise later on this month. We'll bring in all of the new agency heads from around the state into that. So we spent a lot of time in May making sure that our processes are in place and that we're ready to go, so that when June 1 hits and hurricane season lasts for 6 months, that we're ready to go, regardless of whether we've had an actual event or not. So a few things with regards to the actual hurricane season. It runs June 1 to the end of November. For those of you who can't recall, the last time Florida had a landfalling hurricane was Hurricane Wilma in 2005. Oh, so you got it, huh? Okay. I should make that part of the trivia contest. It's been a long time since Florida's had a hurricane. We've had tropical storms. You're right, I should do that. I'll knock on wood. We've had tropical storms. We've had flooding events. We've had wildfires. We've had lots of other things, but we've not had a landfalling hurricane in 10 years. That's fantastic for the state. Nobody wishes a hurricanes, but it does make talking to people about hurricanes a bit more challenging, because since the last time Florida experienced a hurricane, there are millions of new residents in the state. There are millions of folks who were here in the state in 04-05 that only had a passing blow from any of those hurricanes, and so think they've been through what the worst of a storm can do, and don't truly understand exactly how bad hurricanes can be. And so I spend, again, a lot of my time helping people understand, in fact, the millions and millions of Floridians who at this point have never experienced a hurricane or have only had a glancing blow from a hurricane, helping them understand how truly bad they can be. But there are things that you can do individually to make sure that you're ready for it. And so that's, again, what I spend a lot of my time talking about. Before I get into that a little bit, let me tell you what the professionals are doing. And Glenn, I'm sure, will cover some of this as well. They are forecasting the long-term prediction for this season, and there's a number of organizations that do that, but one of the best is out of Colorado State University. I know it's in the middle of the country, but they do a good job on this forecasting. They are predicting a below-average season, which is fine with me. They are predicting it to be well below average. Their prediction for this year is 7 named storms, so that's including tropical storms, 7 named storms total for the Atlantic. 3 of those as hurricanes, 1 of those is a major hurricane. So that is less than half of the average for the last 20 or so years. The prediction for landfall, and they give it at 15% chance of a storm making landfall on the East Coast somewhere, including Florida, and 15% in the Gulf. Again, well below the long-term averages that we would expect climatologically. I hope those come to pass. I hope it is, again, another quiet season. I've told the governor, I'm okay, an emergency manager, but you would really do a better job paying me to avoid storms. That's a better job for me to have, is to just make sure we don't have any storms. And so far, I'm doing pretty good at that. But I was talking to somebody the other day about that. In any other event, if I told you there was a 15% chance of something bad happening, if I said, go ahead and cross the interstate, there's a 15% chance you'll get hit by a car, you're probably going to think twice about that kind of thing. So same thing with hurricanes. Even though it's a 15% chance of landfall here on the east coast of Florida, it's not something you want to mess around with, because if that comes to pass, the consequences can truly be catastrophic. And as we talk about in emergency management, it doesn't really matter how many storms you have. It's the one that hits you that is the important one. And over 20 years ago, we had a season that was well below average. Only produced a few hurricanes, but unfortunately the A storm that year turned out to be Andrew. And we all remember what Andrew did to the state of Florida. So that's what when we go into these things, we read the predictions about what the year is going to look like. We basically take it with a grain of salt. We are not reducing our preparations for hurricane season because of those long-term predictions. We use them as a way to help get the conversation going in the public. The media likes to cover them, so we use those as an opportunity to talk about preparedness. But whether those long-term forecasts tell us we're going to have 1 hurricane or 100 hurricanes, we still prepare for those worst-case scenarios at the State Division of Emergency Management. And they do the same things here in Palm Beach County as well. So rest assured, regardless of what the forecast is, we recognize the opportunity for catastrophic impact by hurricanes and prepare accordingly. There is a blob, as many of you probably have seen in the news, off the east coast of Florida. It's moving slowly northward. The Hurricane Center has given that a 30% chance of becoming some kind of system over the next few days as it drifts slowly northward. Not unprecedented by any means, although the official season for hurricanes is June 1 to November 30th. Mother Nature doesn't know that, and so we will occasionally have those storms develop in May. Sometimes you'll have them develop in January, February. We'll keep a close eye on that one. The good news is it appears to be drifting northward. It will likely remain offshore of Florida. I'm not sure what North Carolina will experience. But it is, again, a good opportunity for people to be aware of the fact that it's hurricane season or nearing hurricane season, and it's time to start thinking about what it is that they're going to do to get ready for that. So we'll keep a close eye on that. I will be with the head of the National Hurricane Center on Thursday, Dr. Rick Knabb. This time of year, the Hurricane Center does a tour with their Hurricane Hunter planes, and they stop at a few places around the state and do an open open exhibit for school children and community members. This year, it started in Canada, in Nova Scotia on Sunday. On Thursday, they land in St. Augustine, and on Friday morning, they fly from St. Augustine to Marathon. And so I'm going to be on the plane Friday morning as it flies from St. Augustine down to Marathon. So if we get the opportunity, I'll tell them swing out over that blob, and we'll get a real good idea of what that system looks like and where it could go. But again, don't expect too much out of that one. It's going northward. We may see some increase in rip currents and other things along the on the beach side, but don't expect too much in the way of traditional impacts from hurricanes on that one. So hopefully Glenn will confirm what I have just said to you on that one. If he tells you something completely different, I'm gonna abdicate my responsibility on the meteorology side to him. So listen to whatever he tells you as to what that storm system's going to do. So personal responsibility is something that we talk about a lot, something I talk a lot about when it comes to emergency management. The fact is that governmental emergency management will never have all of the assets necessary to take care of all Floridians, nor do you want us to. There are 20+ million Floridians in the state at any given time with the residents and the visitors that are here. For us to have assets in place to take care of 20 million Floridians would frankly eat up the entire state's budget. And I think we've all seen how the legislators do with just the normal budget process in Tallahassee. If we tried to figure out how to take care of every Floridian through a disaster, we would never get the budget done on time. The fact is, we rely upon those folks who can take care of themselves to do so, because we need to focus the state's assets, the locals' assets, and the federal assets on those who are unable to do so, those who do not have the fiscal wherewithal, the physical wherewithal, the emotional wherewithal to prepare for those kinds of events and respond, or who are catastrophically impacted. And so the ironic part of me being here tonight is that you are a rapt audience, you're eager, you're listening, but the fact is, you will never need my services, or you should never need my services in a hurricane. Mark and I have spent the last half hour going over what you all do here for a hurricane or other disaster. You all are well taken care of. I'm pleased to see that. The resources you have in place here, you will be just fine after the next hurricane passes. You may have to spend a couple of days in here until the storm passes, but I have every confidence that you all will be able to respond and recover very appropriately. That and the resources you've got here in Palm Beach Gardens and Palm Beach County, you're going to be just fine. I will be focusing my efforts at the state level on all of those parts of the state who do not have the resources that you have, who do not have citizens who came to a hurricane dinner and heard what the season's forecast is going to be, who do not have the food and the water and the batteries and the flashlights in place to help get through this situation. They are the ones who do not have the insurance coverage. They don't have the wind insurance coverage. They don't have the flood insurance coverage. And so when they have the impact from that storm, they don't have the money to rebuild their homes. And so they are now reliant upon somebody from FEMA or somebody from the state coming and giving them a check to help rebuild their lives. That's where we're going to be focusing on as a state, is to make sure that those folks have what they need in those kind of situations. And that's frankly the way the system should be designed. We should be, in emergency management at the governmental level, be focused on being the backstop for those citizens. And as I talk to everybody, as we talk about personal preparedness in advance of hurricane, a little bit invested now pays tremendous dividends down the line. If any of you, and many of you I know went through the 04-05 hurricane season, you know what it's like to be without power for an extended period of time. You know what it's like to not have fresh water available. You know what it's like to not have food available to you. You know that that is not a good experience. But you also know that just a little bit of time spent now can make sure that you can get through that system a lot better. Now is the time to review your insurance policies and talk to your insurance provider about making sure that you have the coverage that you think you have and is appropriate for your situation. As you all know, I'm beginning to sound like a television commercial here, but your needs change over time. Now is the appropriate time to talk about your insurance coverage and make sure you have all of the coverage that you need in those kinds of situations. I was listening to a news report on the way here today, and they were talking about some of the retail businesses in Baltimore that had been impacted by the rioting, and the businesses were shocked to learn that they did not have the right kind of coverage for that situation. Don't find yourself in that same boat. Go through right now. Make sure that you've got the coverage that you want to have so that you were able to get your lives back to normal after a hurricane in the state of Florida. So that's a message I push out to a lot of people. There are federal programs out there that will provide you funding afterwards. There's individual assistance from FEMA. There's charitable organizations. None of those programs are designed to make people whole after a storm. The only things that make people whole after a storm is the appropriate insurance coverage. The fact is that the individual assistance from FEMA that you read about all the time caps out at about $30,000, and the average is somewhere in the $8,000 range. So when you see people who've been impacted by tornadoes and hurricanes and other natural disasters in the country, and they're getting the checks from FEMA, that is not going to fix their problem. It may help them replace some of their belongings. It may help pay for their hotel room for a little bit. But the fact is they're going to be left with a huge financial gulf between what they have lost and what they now have from the federal government. So that's a message you'll hear from me a lot, is encouraging people to understand what is the purpose of insurance and why they should consider it in the state of Florida. Because frankly, I travel the entire state. There is not one part of the state that I go to that could not be impacted by a hurricane. And there is not one part of the state that I go to that could not be impacted by a flood. And that's the message I try to get out there to people, is just because it hasn't happened to you in the last 5 or 10 years or 20 years doesn't mean it can't happen. And so that's one of the things I push out there on the personal preparedness piece of it. Get the kind of stuff that you got out there on that table out there. That's a fantastic disaster kit. That is the deluxe Cadillac version of a disaster kit. If everybody had that, I wouldn't even have a job, frankly, because everybody would be taking care of themselves. But trying to get folks to understand that it doesn't take the deluxe Cadillac version. It takes some water set aside. It takes some canned goods set aside. It takes some batteries set aside, some flashlights. Cell phone chargers are a big piece these days. We encourage folks to make sure they've got the cell phone chargers. Think about what is specific to their circumstances. If you have pets that you love, that you want to make sure are taken care of during a disaster, that you have the appropriate things to take care of their pets or put them in a pet shelter. If you have special medication requirements, that you consider those, and you've got the appropriate amount of medication on hand, that you've got prescriptions in hand, because the supply chain for medications is getting thinner, and there may be disruptions during a disaster. And so we want to make sure people have considered those as they are either sheltering in their home location or evacuating to another part of the state. And so those are a lot of the things that I talk to folks about. Again, just think about what you do every single day and what you need to be comfortable and to get through one of those situations and come out the other end of it healthy and alive, and put all those pieces into place now, because it's going to be extremely doable now and extremely difficult if you try to do it during the actual event itself. Again, there's many of the state who can. I'm trying to talk to those folks so that I can narrow the gap of those who are going to be reliant upon governmental resources after the event. We have a fantastic, when I came into this job, I've been the Director of Emergency Management now for a little over 4 years in Tallahassee. I came into a job that had everything going for it. I'm pleased to be able to follow in the footsteps of Administrator Craig Fugate. Many of you remember Craig. Craig now runs FEMA in Tallahassee. The organization had gone through the 04-05 hurricane season, where they dealt with 7 hurricanes impacting the state of Florida. All of the county emergency management directors with whom I interface on a daily basis, many of those were in place during that. So I came into a fantastic organization that had been there and done that. And so what we've focused on over the last few years is to ensure that we're able to continue that level of success in the absence of an actual disaster for us to practice on. And we do that in a variety of ways. We focus on the training and exercise component and making sure that regardless of what real life brings us, that we have a good understanding of how our processes work by doing multiple exercises. we focus on taking the lessons learned from other states and incorporating them into what Florida is doing. So every time there is a disaster in Hurricane Sandy, for example, or Hurricane Ike or Gustav, we are working with those other states to bring those lessons back and incorporating them into our processes. We also make sure that we push people out to those states to assist. Florida is one of the primary providers of emergency management assistance to other states, so that when they are able to come back, we are able to benefit from the lessons that those folks learn in those locations. So rest assured that although it's been, again, 10 years since Florida has had a direct impact from a hurricane, we have worked very diligently on making sure that we've got the appropriate experience in the organizations who are going to help provide the support to you all after that storm.
So, good evening. My name is Glenn Glazer. I am the morning meteorologist on WPTV News Channel 5. That is the NBC affiliate here in this part of South Florida. We also have a newscast on WFLX, Fox 29. So we do both. And that gets confusing for folks, but we do both. We have the Channel 5 set on one side of the studio, the Fox set on the other side, and we just turn the cameras around and walk across the room and do it over there. So we have both going on. The mystery of television revealed. Sorry. Hurricane season's coming. Although if you've watched the news the past few nights, you see that we have the potential for a named storm to develop over the next couple of days off of the Florida coast. Good news in that is that it is not forecasted to move right into this area. However, we could see a little extra wind and rain depending on where it develops over the next couple of days. If it does develop, it will get a name. We'll go over that in just a moment. So hurricane season actually begins June 1st. It runs through November. A lot of folks think it ends November 1st, but it actually ends November 30th. However, the potential for storms to develop toward the end of November is very, very low due to a number of different reasons. But here are the names for this year's storms. If you have not seen, there are 6 lists of names. They are rotated every 6 years. If a storm does catastrophic damage, its name is removed from the list and it will never be used again. There will never be another Katrina. There will never be another Andrew on the list. Oh yeah, there's a bill. How many bills are here? Congratulations. If you have heard my talk the past few years, I'll just run through a couple things that I usually run through so that I can refresh your memories. Hurricanes didn't always have names. They used to have numbers and even dates, depending on if they fell on a holiday, they might just give them the name of that holiday, Labor Day hurricane, etc. But in the 1950s, the folks at the National Hurricane Center decided to start naming storms. However, most of the people working there at the time were men, and so all the storms were given the names of ex-wives and ex-girlfriends. And it was all women's names. And then in the 1970s, as more women began working at the National Hurricane Center, they said, hey, wait a minute. This doesn't seem right to us. And so they started to alternate female names and male names. The names are picked by the World Meteorological Organization. So you may see some names there that aren't American names, but they try to pick names from all the different islands in the Caribbean and around the Atlantic that may be impacted by Atlantic storms or Caribbean storms. So that's why there's some unusual names in there, maybe unusual to us, but maybe not to everybody. So there are the names for this year. An average Atlantic hurricane season has about 10 to 12 named storms. That's tropical storms and hurricanes. 6 of those could be hurricanes, 3 of those major hurricanes. Now, the forecast from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is not out yet. That comes out later this month. However, Dr. Bill Gray and Dr. Klotzbach from Colorado State University do put out their own forecast every year. And this year they are predicting, a lower than average storm season with 7 named storms, 3 of them hurricanes, and 1 becoming a major hurricane. This is fascinating information, and people love to see this information on the news, so we show it. But we kind of take it with a really big grain of salt, because for us, it doesn't really matter how many storms are predicted for the year. The only storm that matters to us is the one that could be coming this way. That's the only one that matters to us. So we'll look at this forecast and we'll say, okay, that's interesting, but we're going to focus on whatever may impact the people in our community. So we don't hype this very much. We usually show it for about a day, and then we usually don't show it anymore the rest of the season. So the season kind of ramps up by the time we get to the middle of the season, which is August and September. September 10th, September 11th, somewhere in there, the peak of hurricane season. But really, this part of Florida usually has a lot of activity swirling around out in the Atlantic, Caribbean, anytime between August and October. In fact, October is typically a very active month for South Florida, more so than September. But here's a quick look at where storms develop. In the upper left-hand quarter, that's June, and on average, storms develop either right along the east coast of Florida there, near the Bahamas, also in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico, mostly the Gulf of Mexico this time of year. In July, you start to get a few more storms developing down around the Leeward, Windward Islands. That's because the water temperature starts to warm up down there, and that can help support storms. In August, you see a much bigger swath, a much bigger area where storms can develop as the ocean gets really warm and things start swirling. Get a lot of storms coming off the coast of Africa there in September, so it's pretty much the entire Atlantic. And then October, it starts to shrink a little bit. As monsoon season begins to wind down in Africa, we get less storms rolling off the coast there, and we have November where we don't see a lot of activity, but it certainly is possible. But when we talk about the tropics, it's really this whole area that you see in red here. So if you hear us saying we're watching the tropics, it could be anywhere in these areas. South Florida. On average, South Florida has a Category 1 hurricane or greater come within 75 miles every 6 years. We typically see an impact of some sort every 7 to 10 years. However, as was mentioned earlier, it has been a very long time since we have seen a storm here. The last one was Wilma in 2005. We have had some lesser storms move through and a lot of tropical storms, but not a really damaging hurricane. El Nino is something we talk a lot about this time of year. What is it? It's a simple warming of the tropical waters in the Pacific. This can cause a big change in the weather patterns across the United States and across the world, really. It's like throwing a rock in a stream. The water kind of goes around the rock, but it changes the pattern altogether. So very similar things happen. It tends to have an effect on hurricane season, but again, it only takes one storm to make a difference in our area. We'll talk later about El Nino years and their impact, but here's what El Nino can do to Florida. It can occur every 2 to 7 years, cooler and wetter winter months, minimal impact during summer months, but it does tend to lead to decreased activity in the tropics. We do have a slight El Nino developing. We're going to watch and see if it really picks up a bit. So let's go over the different categories of hurricanes. Here we go. Category 1, 74 to 95 mile per hour winds. Category 2, 96 to 110 mile per hour winds. Category 3, 111 to 129 mile per hour winds. Cat 4, 130 to 156 mile per hour winds. And Cat 5, 157 miles per hour plus. 200, 210, 220, goes up. So what does all this mean? Category 1, sustained winds 74 to 95, very dangerous winds. Some examples, Hurricane Dolly, 2008, South Padre Island, Texas, Category 1 hurricane. Hurricane Katrina, as it moved across Florida, was a Category 1. A lot of folks forget that it came across Florida before it went across the Gulf of Mexico and expanded and then hit Louisiana, Mississippi. But it did hit Florida first. Category 2, sustained winds 96 to 110, very dangerous. Hurricane Francis, South Florida, 2004. Anybody here for Francis? Slowest moving hurricane, slowed down to about 3 to 5 miles per hour. And it was a tremendous storm. Took a long time to move over top of us. Category 3, sustained winds 111 to 129, Hurricane Jeanne, same year, a month later, not even, pretty much same month, few weeks later, 2004, almost same exact landfall too. Stewart area, Jensen Beach, that area. But really, the entire area was impacted. Category 4, 130 to 156 miles per hour. Hurricane Charlie, 2004, Punta Gorda, Florida. And Category 5, winds 157 miles per hour or higher. Catastrophic damage. As long as we've been keeping history, there have only been 3 Category 5 hurricanes to ever strike the U.S. Can anybody name one? Hurricane Andrew. Yeah, August 23rd, 1992. By the way, 1992, an El Nino year. Supposed to be low tropical system year, but it only takes one storm. Pictures of Homestead after Hurricane Andrew. The Labor Day hurricane of 1935. In history, the most powerful hurricane to ever strike the United States, moved through Key West. Winds above 200 miles per hour. Train cars, buildings, devastating. Obviously, record keeping not that great back then. We didn't really have satellites taking pictures, so we just have history, people walking around observing, etc. Hurricane Camille, 1969, Gulf of Mexico. Winds 200 miles plus, a storm surge, a wall of water 24 feet high, rolling on shore in Mississippi. This is a very famous apartment building, the Richelieu Manor apartment building in Mississippi. Anybody know anything about this building? It's rumored it was the home of the initial beginning of hurricane parties. Woo! Some folks decided to hang out in the apartment building and supposedly had a hurricane party, although those who survived said, no, that's not what happened at all. We were just tired and we went to bed. But this is the apartment building the day before Camille. This is the day after. Very powerful storm. By the way, just on a side note, they did build a shopping center on this site many years later. That shopping center was wiped out by Hurricane Katrina in 2004. 2005. Okay. Hurricane Jean making landfall. Port St. Lucie, Stewart, obviously 2004. Very rough year for us. Katrina, moving on shore. I just want to show you some satellite pictures of some of these because they're extremely impressive. Hurricane Ike, 2008, rolled across the Caribbean, right over Cuba, out into the Gulf of Mexico, and struck the Texas coast. This is a very famous picture from post-Hurricane Ike. It's called Last House Standing. Yeah. Hurricane Irene, South Florida, 1999. Anybody remember Irene? Came in the middle of the night, dumped tons of rain on our area. I lost the underside of my car during that storm because I couldn't see the curb, and I just ran right through the water and right over top on my way to work. Hurricane Wilma, 2005. Category 3 storm moved across the west coast of Florida and then all the way across the east coast of Florida. It actually moved through very, very quickly. A lot of folks will tell you the back side of this storm was worse than the front side of this storm. Both sides were very powerful, although our theory is it did gain a little bit of strength over Lake Okeechobee, a little bit more as the eye moved offshore. But also, you have to remember that for the first few hours while it was moving across the state, it was bending everything one direction. And then when the winds reversed, it bent everything the other direction, and that's when everything just really broke. Same kind of theory. If you're trying to break a stick and you can't bend it one way, you flip it over and you bend it the other way and it breaks. Very similar to what happened with Wilma as it moved across. So that was the last big storm. However, we've had some destructive storms. Tropical Storm Faye moved through in 2008. Faye caused a lot of damage, tornadic activity. I think it had 5 landfalls in Florida. Came across, went across, and back up like that. Very messy storm. Isaac, Tropical Storm Isaac eventually became a hurricane as it moved across the Gulf of Mexico. Here's a picture from the Acreage and Royal Palm during Isaac. All right. Roadways just washed out, sidewalks, tons of rain. It really tapped into this long stream of rain here. Andrea, Tropical Storm Andrea, in 2013, spawned a whole bunch of tornadoes. We heard talk about that earlier. Most of them just EF0s and EF1s, but there was one EF2 touchdown also. Very, very messy. So this time of year, we talk a lot about the Bermuda High and what it has, what kind of impact it has on storms. We watch it very carefully because it really is one of the main components for steering storms. It's a big area of high pressure out in the Atlantic, and as it sits there, kind of chills out, just waiting for storms to develop. And as the storm develops, the storm rides around the perimeter of that high, so that high determines where the storm is going to be. If it sits way out there and it's really weak, the storm will curve right up the left-hand side of it there and just end up going straight up north. No big deal. If the high is stronger, it can push storms farther to the west, and that drives storms a little farther over. There was a stronger Bermuda High when Hurricane Sandy came across. It came toward Florida, but then it turned around the perimeter of that high and went right up to New Jersey and the northeastern U.S. Our most active year, 2004, in recent years, had a very strong Bermuda High that kept driving storms right toward Florida. So far, the high, not too strong this year, but it's not yet hurricane season, so we're going to watch it carefully. Lots of storms coming off the coast of Africa. They work their way across the Atlantic and eventually begin to develop into something. A lot of folks ask, what is the most powerful side of a storm? The most powerful side of a storm is the right front quadrant of a storm. What does that mean? Well, if you're moving along here, let's say I'm a storm. Hey, how's it going? Moving along. It's going to be this front side here, my right front side, that's the most powerful because it's got two things going on. One, it has forward motion moving along, but it also has that spin coming around on this front side right here, and that makes it very powerful. So if you're in the front quadrant, let's say it's moving this direction, for example, it's the right front quadrant you got to watch out for that has the most power. Weaker side will be the left side, but the weaker side can still do some damage. Pay attention to these cones. I know we show a lot of cones during hurricane season, but if you're in the 5-day cone, check your hurricane kit. Make sure you have all the things you need in your hurricane kit. If you're in the 3-day cone, start to think about what you're going to do. The cones have become much more accurate over the past few years. You'll notice they're getting smaller and smaller because our accuracy is getting better. So we're getting pretty good at predicting where storms are going. We're still not that great at predicting how storms are going to be once they get there. We're working on that. That's the most difficult part because they tend to weaken really quickly or strengthen really quickly as they move into certain areas. So we're pretty good at telling where they're going. It's just not too great so far at telling how they're going to be when they get there. And we also do a lot of wind forecasting and things like that. Storm surge, something we talk a lot about. The National Hurricane Center, in conjunction with the Pentagon and a few other places, are working on a brand new potential storm surge product that I believe is going to start to be used next year. They're working with it experimentally this year. But this is all new data. This is all new, taking into account the continental shelf near where you live, the terrain in your area. Instead of just brushing it with a broad paintbrush and saying, you could get a big storm surge, it actually takes into account the land in your part of the country and how that will be affected as water starts to come in. So it's going to be a much more accurate way of telling when we could see, where we could see extreme storm surge. A hurricane watch, even tropical storm watch, can be thrown in here too. That means that hurricane conditions are expected within 48 hours. This is a big upgrade from a few years ago. It was 36 hours, but now that we're getting better on telling where storms are going, we managed to bump it up to 48 hours. Hurricane warning, 36 hours. You should start all your warning. That's when we tell people they should be putting their shutters up and things like that. Hurricane watch, a lot of people put their shutters up during that as well, but hurricane warnings when we read it. Obviously, it was mentioned earlier, rely on your local folks. It's great to watch the Weather Channel. I love the Weather Channel. I've got friends at the Weather Channel. They love it there. Atlanta's a great place this time of year. You should go visit. It's lovely. However, for the best information, turn to your local guys, your local National Weather Service, and, of course, your local meteorologists. We're on it. We live here. Our families live here. This is important to us. We want to keep everybody safe, and we're on it all the time. We also simulcast on all Clear Channel radio stations. So if your power goes out, you can't watch TV, we're on all Clear Channel radio stations nonstop throughout a storm. We're there. Discuss your plan with your family. If you decide to go somewhere out of state, please tell someone where you're going and when you expect to be there. Don't just take off and then phones go down and things like that, and nobody knows where you are and can't get in touch with you. Make sure you let everybody know what you're doing. Make sure you have everything that you need. 1 gallon of water daily per person for 3 to 7 days. Food, 3 to 7 days. Pillows, clothing, prescription drugs, hygiene items. I can't emphasize that enough. Make sure you have some deodorant, a toothbrush. That's great for everybody else. But have all these things ready to go. Flashlight, battery, radios. You know what? Make sure you have a weather radio. I love these. I have one at home with a crank on the side in case the battery runs dead. Also a good arm workout if your battery runs low. Very, very good, but very good for information. Also, we recommend our Storm Shield app. I know it sounds like a plug, but it's actually a really good app for your smartphone, and it does alert you to all watches and warnings and everything you need to know. And it has audio, just like a weather radio, and also text, so you can have both going on.
Let's please give Mr. Glenn Glazer a round of applause, as well as Director Brian Kuhn. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming. And for our special guests from Palm Beach Gardens, again, thank you very much for everything you do.